So how many of you find that having really wonderful, rich, deeply engaged relationships makes your lives better? Yeah, me too. Now, how many of you ever encounter people who make having those kind of relationships extremely difficult? Like a boss who doesn't want any input from you, or a relative who's holding on to some ancient grudge? How many of you? Yeah, me too. But now let's really look in the mirror. How many of you, sometimes you yourself, are the reason why you don't have such good relationships? Like you're engaged in some power battle, or you have some ego issue. Fess up. How many of you? Yeah, me too. So when I was preparing this, and I was thinking, how can they call me a master bridge builder? I still struggle with this every day. And then I realized, well, yeah, that's kind of the heart of it. Engaged relationships are not easy. They're difficult. We don't always succeed. Sometimes for external reasons, and sometimes just because of all the junk inside of ourselves. But that doesn't mean it's not worth trying. So let's examine the possibilities. Today, people marvel at how connected we can be with our smartphones and our social networks, and it is wonderful. But long before all of that, 50 years ago as a student, I was deeply inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s message about how profoundly interconnected we all are. And it really formed my life. And decades later, I had the privilege of working with Nelson Mandela, another great engagement leader. But it would be so defeatist if we thought we had to be extraordinary people like King or Mandela in order to form engaged relationships, even with people who have differing views from us. So let's look at what's possible. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm taking you back to a story from the 1970s. And I chose this story because it was one of the earliest times that I helped facilitate an effort that turned adversaries into allies. And the wonderful part of it is that those same people are still doing great things together today. Now, many, many people were involved, but I'm going to try to simplify it. And I'm going to introduce you to one player from each sector. So there's Isabel from government, and Paul from community organizers, and Hunter from environmentalists, and Alston from the logging industry. These four groups at the time were the bitterest of adversaries. They all hated each other. And yet, somehow, we got them to come together, work together, and achieve remarkable things. Picture the starting scene. We're in a conference room, and Paul and Isabel are there, along with their respective constituencies. And Isabel is talking about all the scientific, environmental benefits of first cities, about how trees absorb carbon dioxide, blah, blah, blah. And the community organizers are literally rolling their eyes because their daily job is getting food, clothing, and shelter to very needy families. But then Isabel says that she believes the key ingredient for success is community engagement. And all of a sudden, the organizers sit up. Community engagement. Say more. And she suggests that they go neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block, and get individual residents to adopt the newly planted trees. All of a sudden, there's one of those light bulb aha moments. Who cares if we want this for different reasons? One group, tree planting, another group, community organizing. There's something in this for both of us that we can get out of this, that it's worth it for us to enter into this relationship. So be honest and clear about what you expect. Now, this seems so obvious, but I can't tell you the number of collaborations I've seen fail simply because people do not explicitly clarify to each other or even to themselves what their expectations are. Of course, we had to do constant shuttle diplomacy to keep them together. Because even when we really, really want to stay engaged, we just forget the reason why we initially decided to. Like even in our most personal relationships. So come with me into the hospital room when my husband was sick, and my prayer went something like this. God, you know all those times I said, I can't stand living with him one more minute? I didn't mean it. I take it back. I really love him. So just imagine if we can have feelings like that for people we adore, and I really do adore my husband, then how much more complicated and challenging is it for us to stay connected to others, and especially if those others have a different view than we do, which is why it's so important to keep the clarity of why you decided to engage. And that's exactly what these two groups did. And as they started to have positive experiences working together, they realized, okay, we've congealed, now we've got to go to the next group. In order to be successful, we've got to get the environmentalists on board. And they chose Hunter because they knew that she understood that while it felt cathartic for many activists to protest loggers, that unless they actually engaged with them, nothing was ever going to change. But remember, this is the 1970s. Environmentalists are chaining themselves to trees. So Hunter had to weather a storm of accusations that she was selling out, just as Mandela did when he started negotiating with the apartheid government. So mobilize those who can go beyond territorial positions and see a bigger picture. Believe me, you all know, there are plenty of people who just choose to guard their own territorial narrow position, and they're never going to help you form engaged relationships. In fact, they're going to fight you at every step of the way. I know that they've driven me crazy, and they've even broken my heart. But I decided to choose those people who have some capacity to engage and then try to make it as easy as possible for them to do it. So once we had these two groups working together, now three groups, three partner groups, led by Isabel, Paul, and Hunter, we had to approach the fourth group. This was really tough, the logging community. It was not easy for any of them. They were the perceived enemy. But again, we chose a window of opportunity. We saw a company where there was someone who understood. Now, it was no easier for Alston, the leader of the logging company, to step outside of the boundaries of what his constituents thought was appropriate than it had been for any of the others to deal with their own stakeholders. But he, too, had the capacity to go beyond territorial positions and to lead his colleagues with him. Now we had this growing coalition. But it was none of this happens overnight. Engagement requires ongoing nourishment. It took many, many meetings before they decided to join the coalition. But once they did join the coalition, first working on this urban tree planting project and then working on a statewide reforestation plan, agreeing to plant 2 trees for for every one they cut down, which, by the way, became a blueprint for global green plans throughout the world that still follow today. So enormous things were accomplished. Now, what strikes me about this, what's most interesting about it, is that beyond all the logic-based benefits, of which there were many to each of the constituent groups, what really, truly, absolutely made it possible was our basic shared humanity. Again, it seems so simple, but revealing your humanity is what makes things possible. Picture our first tree planting party. It was a neighborhood tree planting party, and we had everyone, executives and organizers. They were meeting each other's families. They were sharing barbecue. They were even dancing together. Suddenly, it became real. For me, that was the most glorious day in the process, watching people discover the humanity in each other. It's an ongoing journey. This doesn't happen overnight. This takes effort. But regardless, I've done this now in so many different situations across sectors, even within the same organization. How many of you have sat cubicle by side and yet had great divides? Of course, bringing people together who have differing views is tough. But how much better would our lives be if we actually tried and we actually did it? And really, it boils down to these very simple, common sense: be honest and clear, go beyond territorial positions, offer ongoing nourishing, and reveal your humanity. This is where the insights of King and Mandela tie into our everyday life. Because when enemies can experience that they actually have more in common with each other than they thought, things can shift and change. Now, all of this is really common sense. You might be saying, what's new? But really, even though we know this, if not cognitively, we know it somewhere deep in ourselves, how many of us actually invest the time and energy to commit to engaged relationships that are difficult? Really think about it. And then I ask you to think again about Nelson Mandela. After 27 brutal years in prison, he came out as a fervent advocate of engaging with the very people and institutions that had oppressed him. So if arch enemies can find a way to engage with each other, what's stopping you?